dedicated to my son Sean Anthony Steele, in loving memory of my father Richard Steele. Chapter V. In the next place, I wish prior to the theory of Parmenides to teach what the gods are, possessing this peculiarity, of whom Plato makes mention in other dialogues, for perhaps thus the doctrine of Parmenides will become more credible, and more manifest to reason. The ruling gods, therefore, are divided in a threefold manner, and some of them indeed are united to the intellectual kings, and extend the whole series under themselves to a union with those kings, but others give completion to the middle genera, and distribute the all-perfect progression of these gods, and others close the end of this order, and enfold the powers of these divinities to secondary natures. This being the case, those gods that are arranged in the summits, do not immediately participate of the similitude of the assimilative gods, but some of them are in a certain respect established above it, and are essentially connected with the intellectual gods, but others proceed from it, and are mingled with the secondary genera. Hence, those only who give completion to the middle breadth, genuinely define in themselves the hyparxis of this order. We, therefore, likewise beginning from these, shall embrace by our reasoning process the whole theory of Plato, for we shall find in these, the perfect measures of the ruling order, perfectly delivered to us by him. Again, therefore, let us refer the whole progression of these middle orders, to a triad, it being allotted a division of this kind supernally, from the three intellectual fathers. Hence, indeed, this whole order of gods, is suspended from the demiurgic monad, but the demiurgic intellect produces indeed some of them from itself and the intellectual father, but others from itself, and the whole vivification, and others from appropriate rivers. Hence, also, of the gods that thus derive their subsistence, some are allotted a paternal dignity, and are ruling fathers, but others are allotted a generative, and others an elevating and convertive dignity. But since a certain order of the unpolluted gods is conjoined with each of the intellectual kings, it is indeed necessary that in the ruling gods also, a second progression from them should shine forth to the view, and that on this account the guardian order should be connoissant with the above-mentioned triple orders, being appropriately consubsistent with each of them, viz. Paternally indeed in the first, but vivifically in the middle, and intellectually and convertively in the third order. And thus it is necessary that this whole order of God should be divided by paternal powers, and prolific progressions, by powers that lead upward all secondary natures, and by those that are of an undefiled guardian characteristic, for being allotted their hypostasis from the intellectual gods, some indeed ascend totally into parts, but others partably pour on wholes, the exuberant powers of themselves. They likewise distribute the providence of the demiurgus and father, some indeed arranging and adorning the universe with the first, middle, and last forms of production, others educing the rivers of life, and pouring them on all things, others elevating the natures that have preceded, and recalling them to the Father, and others presiding over purity, and being the guardians of secondary natures. Chapter VI. Again, therefore, receiving the beginning of the theory of Plato from the paternal cause, we assert as follows: the demiurgus and father of this universe, being allotted this order in the intellectual kings, as was before demonstrated, as he produced wholes totally, and referred all things to the one form of the world, and the one perfection of the universe, thus also he arranged and adorned the parts of the world, and gave completion to the whole, contriving that all immortal and mortal nature should be generated for the sake of the universe. And this is what Plato introduces him saying in the Timos to the junior gods, that mortal natures therefore may exist, and that this universe may be truly all. Convert yourselves according to nature to the fabrication of animals, since, however, after the monad, it is everywhere necessary that a multitude should be generated proximate to the monad, and that prior to an all-perfect division, united number should subsist, for that which has proceeded to all things is not allied to that which abides, nor is it possible that what is all variously divided, should be connoissant with that which is impartible. This being the case, the demiurgus of wholes, produces indeed from himself, and his father a number proximate to the monad of the fathers, but the three fathers, deriving their subsistence from one father, and first receiving the power and dominion of fabrication, produce other second and third fabricators from themselves, till through a diminution proceeding according to appropriate measures, they evolved the whole demiurgic number, the cause of which indeed, the demiurgic monad comprehends in itself. The orderly progression, however, of multitude becomes at length apparent, and thus the three ruling fathers of wholes separate their productions by first, middle, and last bound. Air is of fabrication, and are all of them total, but they are fabricators and fathers of parts totally, through being in continuity indeed with the monad, not changing the form of production, but on account of diminished progression, not possessing an energy impartibly extended to all things, and the one demiurgus indeed, being arranged prior to the triad, comprehends in himself uniformly the productions of all, the demiurgi, but these three fathers multiply the unical dominion and power of the first demiurgus, divide his impartible production, and led forth into secondary natures the stable energy of the father, and the exempt monad indeed comprehends in itself the all-perfect measure of the triad, according to supreme union, but the triad unfolds into light from itself the undivided power of the monad. Plato, therefore, celebrates indeed, in other dialogues, these three fabricators and fathers, but particularly in the Gorgias, adducing as a witness of the theory concerning them, divinely inspired poetry. He refers the whole progression of them to Saturn, the father of the intellectual gods, and from thence gives to them their first production into light. He exempts, however, the demiurgic intellect from division of them, co-arranges it with the father, and says that they have an intellectual dominion secondary to him. He likewise calls them the sons of Saturn, but indicates that they are allotted their progression from Jupiter, for there is a twofold Jupiter both according to Plato, and all the theology, as I may say, of the Greeks, the one indeed convolving the end of the intellectual triad to the beginning, but the other being allotted the summit of the ruling triad, and the one being the demiurgus of wholes totally, but the other being allotted the first parts of divided fabrication, and the one indeed being arranged prior to the three fathers, but the other being the first of the three, and proximate to the remaining fathers. Whence, also, I think that many who discuss these particulars are ignorant that Jupiter, the demiurgus of the universe, is not the first of the three fathers, and that Saturn, the leader and ruler of the intellectual kings, is not the same with the demiurgic intellect. For of those who immediately suspend the triad of the ruling fathers from the paternal kingdom of Saturn, some indeed refer the whole fabrication of things to Saturn himself, but others ascribe to the summit of the triad the generation of wholes. Is not, however, each of these impossible, for the one abiding in himself, and converting to himself everything which has preceded, is exempt from demiurgic production, but the other being divided oppositely to the total fathers, will not be the impartible fabricator of wholes, for it is necessary that the whole and all-perfect demiurgus of the world, should neither be commemorated with the many demiurgi, nor be the same with the cause which is stable, and perfectly established in itself, for he has a subsistence contrary to the cause which recalls that which has preceded, and again exhibits it uneminent from itself. To be present likewise to all things by no means accords with that nature which energizes separately, and takes away its generative power. How, therefore, can he who converts his own children to himself, and shuts his own progeny in himself, possess the same power with the demiurgus who unfolds all things into light, and produces them into multitude? And how can he who is allotted the universe in conjunction with the remaining demiurgi, be uniformly the cause of the universe? For, if you are willing, consider each of these three demiurgi, and survey what will happen from this assertion. For we say that the first of them is the cause of essence, and of existence to the fabrications in the world, but that the second is the source of the motion, life, and generation of sensibles, and that the third is the cause of the divided production of forms of partible circumscription, and of the circular conversion of wholes to their one principle. We likewise definitely assert these things, admitting that the fabrication of each of the three extends to the whole world, but surveying the peculiar mode of fabrication in each, we say that the first is the effector of essence, the second of life, and the third of intellect, and that the first is the cause of hypoxis, the second of motion, and the third of conversion. Hence, the whole world, so far as it participates of being, is produced from the first father, but so far as it subsists through motion, and is generation, it receives its progression from the second father, and so far as it is perfectly divided, and after all various division, is converted to its proper principle, it is produced from the third father. Chapter Viii. These things, therefore, being thus determined, we may see how in the Timos, the demiurgus and father of this universe, at one and the same time impartibly constitutes the world, gives to it essence, and supplies it with existence, fashioning bodies, generating souls in the middle of an impartible and partible essence, and constituting intellects ingenerably, i.e. without generation, and indivisibly, from the first genera, and farther still, besides these things, he distributes different motions to souls and bodies, divides each of them all variously, according to harmonic reasons, binds them by analogies, and converts them to himself, and his own will. How, therefore, can we any longer rank such a demiurgus as this in the same order with one of these three fathers? For those things which they are said to give to the universe divisibly, he constitutes impartibly from himself, nor does he produce some things precedenteously, and others according to accident, but by his very being he generates essence, supplies motions, and extends the divisions of mundane forms, and after the progression of other things, converts all things to himself, abiding in his own accustomed manner. In the second place, therefore, we say that the three demiurgi differ from each other, because the first paternally comprehends the rest, and is the father of this whole triad, but the second is the power of the triad, and participates of the extremes according to the peculiarity of powers, and the third is the intellect of the triad, and contains the paternal and intellectual power, by participation, and in short, the first is the father of both, but the second is the power of both, and the third is the intellect of both. How, therefore, can the demiurgus of hells be the same with one of the above-mentioned fathers? For he, as Samos says, is the father of all the world, and is allotted in himself a paternal power and divine intellect, converting all things to the watchtower of himself. Again, therefore, we find that the partible peculiarities of the three demiurgi pre-exist in him impartibly and uniformly, and as the demiurgic triad participates of union with him, on account of the uncircumscribed transcendency of the monad, thus also the monad antecedently and occultly comprehends in itself the triad, according to the power of causes, nor is it proper to confound these with each other, but it is requisite to exempt the monad from the triad, and to suspend the triad from the monad, and neither ought we to make the three fathers, the rulers of total fabrication, nor to rank the first of them in the same order with the one demiurgus, for a coordinated entirely differs from an exempt cause, and that which produces all things according to comprehension perfectly differs from that which is similarly present to all things, and is equally distant from all things. Besides this also, multitude is everywhere suspended from its proper monad, and as the one precedes the total orders of things, so likewise each order of the gods has its progression from a monad, since also, each god is allotted a union which antecedes the multitude it contains. But if the whole genus of the gods, and each god proceed after the same manner, it is also necessary that each of the divided orders should have the same mode of subsistence. In the third place we say that both Plato and the ancient theology of the Greeks assert, that these three demiurgi divide the uniform kingdom of their father Saturn, and that one of these three everywhere arranges and adorns the first of wholes, another the middles, and another the extremities of wholes, and that each is allotted this order, not in fabrication only, but also in the providence of partial souls, for of these, some indeed are arranged and perfected under the firsts, prior to generation, but others, that give completion to generation, are arranged under the second, and others, that require purification after generation, are perfected under the third. Moreover, the first demiurgus, as it is written in the Timos, produces the whole world, for he constitutes the circulation of the same, and arranges and adorns the circulation of the different, and all sublunary natures as far as to the earth, which he fabricated to be the guardian of night and day, being immovably fixed about the axis which is extended through the poles of the universe. He also fills the whole parts of the world with their proper numbers, and gives generation to all of them, both to those that revolve manifestly, and to those that become manifest when they please. Again, he defines the whole period to partial souls, the measures of their descent into a generation, the vicissitudes of the present life, and their restitutions to their kindred star, and he is also said to unfold to them all the laws of fate, and to point out to them the nature of the universe. Hence, he is not one of these three fathers, nor is he co-arranged with them, but is perfectly exempt from the triad. According likewise to the proper prerogative of his empire, he is expanded separately above each, and in common above all of them, and the operations, indeed, of these fathers, are divided about him, and are distinguished by more partial boundaries, but his fabrication is uncircumscribed, is one whole, and is impartible. Chapter Viii. Let it therefore, from these things be manifest, that the demiurgic monad is exempt from the ruling fathers, and that according to one undivided cause he generates beings eternally. But if Jupiter is according to Plato, the one and whole fabricator of the only begotten world, as we have before demonstrated, and we grant these things without being deceived, and if, as it is now said, and Socrates in the Gorgias teaches us, the first of the demiurgi that divide the kingdom of Saturn, is in a similar manner called Jupiter, there will be according to this theory a twofold Jupiter, the one being an intellectual god prior to the three fathers, but the other being of a ruling, assimilative, and principal nature, and arranged at the summit of the three. For Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto divide, says Plato, the kingdom of their father, three leaders of whole subsisting from one great king as it were, and producing the one fountain of the demiurgic series, into one all-perfect principal triad, which Plato also indicating, denominates the providence divided in the three kingdom, attributing the first effective, and the uniform to the gods prior to these. If these however, are not the only orders of Jupiter, but there is also another Jovian multitude, how this proceeds will be evident in what follows. For all these three fathers participate of the same appellation, and are after the same manner celebrated by poets inspired by Phobos, but one is called simply Jupiter, another marine Jupiter, and another subterranean Jupiter. The leader however of the three, possesses primarily the paternal dignity in the triad, and the appellation of the great Jupiter, for on account of the supreme union which he is allotted with the fontal demiurgus, who is beyond the three, he also participates of the same name as the total Jupiter, without any distinction, and on this account, I think, Socrates, in the Cratylus, unfolding to us the arcane and mystic discipline concerning the gods, from names, and at one time co-arranging Jupiter with Saturn, and at another with the remaining demiurgi, does not think it worthwhile to speak twice about the same things, but in the intellectual conceptions about the all-perfect demiurgus, he also thinks fit to deliver the arcane discipline concerning the first of the three demiurgi, through the truth of names, for in a certain respect, it was not possible for him to do otherwise, who shows that the theory in things accords with names, since also, the father of this triad, is inseparably united to the whole demiurgus. But of these things enough. If you are willing however, we will add the following observations to what has been said, for perhaps someone may apprehend that the fable in the Gorgias, gives to the three sons of Saturn, a progression from Saturn proximately, but not, as we have said, through the demiurgic monad as a medium, for again, the three are said to divide the kingdom of Saturn, but not of the whole demiurgus and father, that we may not however, ignorantly wander beyond measure from the conception of Plato, and the truth of things, in consequence of following fabulous fictions, we must affirm from the beginning, that both the whole demiurgus, and this triad of the ruling fathers, proceed from the father of the intellectual gods, but the whole demiurgus proceeding from a whole, impartibly participates of his father, for he abides in the allness of his power, and imitates, if it be lawful so to speak, his uniform and unmultiplied nature, by being monadic and whole, and the father of things first, middle and last. But the three demiurgi, in a divided manner participate of, and proceed from their generating cause, being divided indeed from each other, but dividing his unical providence. And Saturn indeed, is a god one and numerous, establishing multitude in himself, and occultly comprehending it in appropriate boundaries. But Jupiter expresses the paternal monad, and produces the unical nature of it into the providence of wholes, and the three sons of Saturn unfold into light the multitude which is there, in the all-perfect boundary of the triad. Hence also they are said to divide the kingdom of their father, which Jupiter possessed indivisibly. Hence, if it be requisite to speak boldly, he indeed is a preceding father, hastening to arrange and adorn, and being parturient in order to the generation of wholes, but they distribute his providence. This however, is the same thing as to say they distribute the providence of Jupiter, for the progression to them was from each of these divinities, from Saturn indeed, according to the from which,
αφού,
but from Jupiter according to the by which,
ύφου, ένα.
For Jupiter indeed unfolds them into light, but they proceed from the Saturnian adita. If again, you are willing, to consider the affair, according to the Parmenides of Plato, since in the Saturnian order there are both wholeness and parts, if you assume the subsistence thereof that which is in another, according to whole, but of that which is in itself, according to parts, Jupiter indeed, who is prior to the three, proceeds from his father according to whole, but the three demiurgi, according to parts. Hence, Jupiter reigns, possessing in himself, as Socrates says in the Philebus, a royal intellect, but they reign in a divided manner, and are allotted the universe according to parts. Hence therefore, the Elean guest in the Politicus, celebrates these two intellectual kings, one indeed, being the cause of the unapparent life to wholes, and of the other circulation, but the other being the source of the manifest order of things, and of the present period, and he attributes to Jupiter the cause of both these periods. But at one time indeed, he ascribes this cause to Jupiter, as leading all things in the universe to the kingdom of Saturn, but at another, as binding to himself the providence of secondary natures, for he is united to his father by intellectual bonds, of which Socrates makes mention in the Cratylus. He is likewise a whole extended to a whole, and as it were adapts himself by his own light to the light of his father, and possesses a second dominion. Hence also, he is said to define the providence of his father. The Athenian guest however, in the laws, extending us to the one demiurgic kingdom, to the law, and the total justice which are there asserts, that God, as it is said, possesses the beginning, middle, and end of all beings, and bounds all things by a circular progression according to nature, in a direct path, for because we do not think it right to consider Plato here as speaking of the first God, or of any other of the intellectual or intelligible fathers, but of the whole demiurgus, it is sufficient for those who are moderately able to understand things of this kind, that he is said to bound all things in a direct path, and to proceed circularly according to nature. It is also sufficient, that justice is said to be the attendant of this God, being the avenger of those who transgress the divine law. For the first God, and all the gods who are established above the perfective order, are exempt from this rectilinear, and also from the circular progression, as Parmenides teaches us. They likewise transcend all motion, but the first that proceeds after motion, is the whole and all-perfect demiurgus. To this divinity therefore, it pertains to bound wholes in a direct path, to proceed circularly, and to be followed by justice. For we say indeed, that the thing which follows that which is moved. Moreover, the gods who are secondary to the demiurgus, have not a unical dominion over wholes as he has, nor do they antecedently assume the beginnings, middles and ends of all beings, but some of them indeed, preside over partial natures totally, as these three fathers, but others preside over wholes partably, as those who pour upon all things the rivers of life, in a divided manner, and others preside over parts partably, as the last of the demiurgi, and who are conversant with the world. The one and impartible demiurgus of wholes therefore, alone comprehends in himself, the beginning, middle, and end of all beings, and equally rules over all secondary natures according to one cause. But justice follows him, bounding the desert of the whole of things, and circumscribing each thing in its proper limits, and these things the Athenian guest manifests in the above-mentioned words, but Orpheus clearly refers them to the whole demiurgus, for he says that total justice follows him, now reigning over, and beginning to arrange and adorn the universe. Justice, the abundant punisher of crimes, aid and defense of all things, follows Jove. Moreover, that Jupiter comprehends the beginnings, middles and ends of wholes, the theologist says, in addition to these things, Jove's the beginning, and the middle's Jove, and all things flow from Jove's prolific mind. And it appears to me that Plato, looking to all the Grecian theology, and particularly to the Orphic mystic discipline, says, that God, according to the ancient assertion, possesses the beginning, middle, and end of all things, bounding the whole of things in a direct path, and proceeding circularly according to nature, and that he has justice for his attendant, through which everything that departs from the providential empire of Jupiter is converted to it, and obtains an appropriate end. Through these things therefore, we have reminded the reader, that the Athenian guest also looking to the whole demiurgus, proclaims things of this kind to his pupils. If however, these things are rightly determined, it is indeed entirely necessary to exempt the one demiurgus, according to essence, from these three demiurgi, for if one of them indeed, comprehends the beginnings of everything in the world, but another the middles, and another, everywhere convolves the ends, is it not necessary that he who uniformly rules over the universe, should be established above divided causes, but the Athenian guest gives to him a power generative of this triad of demiurgy, for if he comprehends the beginnings, middles, and ends of the whole of things, according to the primary cause indeed, he generates the demiurgus, who arranges and adorns first natures, but according to middle causes, the demiurgus who gives completion to the middle boundaries of fabrication, and according to the end, the demiurgus who adapts an appropriate production to the last of things. Chapter IX. The Athenian guest therefore, does all but clearly say, that the distribution to the three sons of Saturn, the measures of providence, and in short, progression, are suspended from the great Jupiter, and that it is he who supernally defines their allotments, and uniformly comprehends all of them in himself. Moreover, with respect to the assertions, that he bounds all things in a direct path, and that he proceeds circularly according to nature, the former of these, manifests the progression of wholes from him, for the direct is a symbol of progression, but the latter manifests the conversion of wholes to him, for he being intellectually converted in, and to himself, convolves all things to the watchtower of himself. But if the straight and the circular first subsist in the perfective gods, the demiurgus of wholes is filled indeed from thence, but fills the natures posterior to himself with the powers that proceed from him, and as according to the triple cause of wholes, he constitutes the triad of demiurgy in conjunction with his father, thus also according to these twofold powers, he generates twofold orders of gods, one indeed, which adorns a sensible nature, according to the straight which is in him, but the other which elevates all things to him, according to the circular. Moreover, because he proceeds indeed from the whole fabrication, i.e. from rear, but participates of the perfective triad, he connects this straight and circular with motion, for to bound according to the straight, and to proceed circularly, designate motion, the former indeed, being significant of motion proceeding to all things, and adorning all things with boundaries, forms and reasons, but the latter, of motion convolving to itself, and calling upward all things to itself. Again, therefore, Plato placing in the one demiurgus the cause of the triad, exempts him, who abides as it were in himself, from production according to parts, but attributes to the triad a division according to the demiurgus. Fortsamors also, by placing in him a paternal cause, a generative power, and a royal intellect, theologizes the same things about him as the Athenian guests. The paternal, indeed, is everywhere principal, but power belongs to the middle, and intellect closes the end of the triad. For power, according to the oracle, is with them, i.e. with father and intellect, but intellect is from him, i.e. from the father. Hence, of the natures which have preceded, one is the father of the whole triad, but another the intellect of it, and one indeed is allotted the beginning of total fabrication, but another gives completion to the middle of the generation of wholes, and another bounds the end of it. Nor must we here omit to observe the accuracy of Plato, but survey how the Athenian guest magnificently celebrates the extremities of the three demiurgi, by more singular names, calling one the beginning, and the other the end, but that which is between the extremes even in causes, he manifests through multitude, for he denominates it middles, since power also, as being coordinate with the infinite, or rather being a certain infinity, is the cause of multitude and division to wholes. Hence also, of the three demiurgi, one indeed, is the cause to mundane natures of a stable collocation, but another, of generation proceeding to all things, and another, of the circulation of things to the principle of their progression. Let us, however, return whence we digressed, to the discussion concerning the first demiurgus, in which it was said, that Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto divide the kingdom of their father, for prior to these, the demiurgus received the kingdom of his father in an undivided and uniform manner, for both the demiurgic monad and the triad, were thence allotted their progression from the beginning, and their dominion over secondary natures, but the former impartibly, and the latter partably, and the former monadically, but the latter triadically, that you may not, therefore, think that these three proceed after the same manner from the father, as the one king who is prior to the three, Socrates, in the Gorgias, in the form of a fable, says that they divide the kingdom of the father, and on this account requires secondary laws, and a subordinate order, and which is adapted to parts, for the law under Saturn, and the law of Jupiter, who recently possesses the kingdom of his father, appear to be by no means adapted to the providence of those powers who produce our partial and various form of life. And do you not see how Socrates gives to total Jupiter and to Saturn an exempt transcendency, and connects one law with both kingdoms, but to the three demiurgi that divide the kingdom, he definitely assigns as it were another polity, and more various laws commensurate to the subjects of their providential care, for he says that Pluto, and the curators were present inquiring of Jupiter respecting the second legislation, but that he placed over partible lives, other judges, and laws adapted to these lives. Again, therefore, Jupiter, who definitely assigns things of this kind, and who generates the three judges, is not the same with the Jupiter who is prior to the three demiurgi, for the latter was together with his father according to a prior law, and the simplicity of a divine life, but the former together with Pluto, leads into order and bound the variety of partial natures, and is the leader of secondary laws. The divine law, therefore, is with the intellectual kings, Saturn and Jupiter, and also justice, the avenger of those who transgress the divine law, as the Athenian guest says. But other more various laws are with the three sons of Saturn, and also judges coordinate to such like laws, as it is written in the Gorgias. And there indeed, i.e. with the intellectual kings, all things are impartibly, and unitedly, but here, i.e. with the three sons of Saturn, all things subsist in a divided and partible manner, and the things which are there being primary, the law indeed is more Saturnian, but justice follows the great Jupiter, and the laws indeed pertaining to secondary natures, confer perfection under the first of the sons of Saturn, but the judges give completion to the empire of the third of these sons, and Pluto participates from the second Jupiter of the separation of the laws, in the same manner as the total Jupiter receives from Saturn the one law which is to be the co-administrator with him in the total fabrication of things. In short, the Jupiter who is co-arranged with Neptune and Pluto, is the summit of the ruling triad, but the Jupiter who is co-arranged with Saturn and the mistress Rhea, is the third of the intellectual triad. Hence also, Socrates, in the Cratylus, at one time ascends from Jupiter to Saturn, and conjoins the two kingdoms, but at another time he proceeds from Jupiter to Neptune and Pluto, and enfolds this one ruling triad, just as in the Gorgias, he weaves together the Saturnian and Jovian order, when he says that there is one and the same law in both. He co-arranges therefore, the second and more partial Jupiter with Pluto, according to the apparent correction of the prior law, and the distribution of the second laws, and thus much may suffice concerning these particulars. Chapter X, 2. It now remains that we should begin to speak about these three fathers, following the mystic narrations of Plato, since all of them are suspended from the demiurgic monad, and present themselves to our view as the second, in rank, after it. These three leaders, therefore, of wholes, and rulers, are emitted indeed from the intellectual fathers, and are divided according to them, but they are unfolded into light in all the partible orders, of the gods, for among the rulers they are allotted the first order, and are analogous to the intelligible and intellectual fathers, in the whole assimilative series, and having made a second progression in the liberated gods, they rule over the universe. Together also with the mundane gods, they give completion to the apparent order of things, being allotted in one way in essence in the heavens, but in another way distributing the total parts in the sublunary region, but everywhere energizing paternally and demiurgically, expanding the one fabrication, and adapting it to parts, with respect, however, to the allotment and distribution of them. In the first place, if you please, it is according to the whole universe, the first of them producing essences, the second lives and generations, and the third administering formal divisions, and the first indeed establishing in the one demiurgus all things that thence proceed, but the second calling all things into progression, and the third converting all things to itself. In the second place, the allotment and division of them are according to the parts of the universe, for the first of them adorns the inerratic sphere, and the circulation of it, but the second governs the planetary regions and perfects the multiform, efficacious, and prolific motions in it, and the last administers the sublunary region, and intellectually perfects the terrestrial world. Again, in the third place, we may survey in that which is generated, these three demiurgic progressions, since Timaeus also here makes mention of the offspring of Saturn. Jupiter, therefore, administers the summit of generated natures, and governs the spheres of fire and air, but Neptune all variously moves the middle and very mutable elements, and is the inspective guardian of every moist essence, which is beheld in air and water, and Pluto providentially attends to the earth, and to everything in the earth. Hence also he is called terrestrial Jupiter. In the fourth place, therefore, in the whole of generation, Jupiter indeed is allotted the summits, and the parts which are raised above others, in which also are the allotments of happy souls, as Socrates says in the Phaedrus, because they then live under Jupiter, beyond generation. But Neptune is allotted cavities, and cavernous places, with which generation, motion, and the incursion of concussions are conversant. Hence, they call this god, the earth shaker, and Pluto is allotted the places under the earth, various streams, Tartarus itself, and in short, the places in which souls are judged and punished. Whence also, of souls themselves, they say that such of them as have not yet proceeded into generation, but abide in the intelligible, are Jovian, but that such as are conversant with generation, are arranged under Neptune, and that such as are purified and punished after generation, and wander under the earth, according to a journey of 1,000 years, or which are again converted and led back to their principle, are perfected under Pluto. In the fifth place, therefore, we must say that the allotments of these divinities are divided according to the centers of the universe, and Jupiter, indeed, has the eastern center, as being allotted an order analogous to fire, but Neptune, the middle center, which pertains to vivification, and according to which especially generation enjoys celestial natures, and Pluto the western center, since we say that the west is coordinate to earth, as being nocturnal, and the cause of the unapparent, for shadow is from earth, and earth is the privation of light from west to east. In short, according to every division of the world, we admit that the first and most leading parts are Jovian, but we say that the middle parts pertain to the kingdom of Neptune, and we consider the last parts as belonging to the empire of Pluto. Chapter 11. Through these things, therefore, the triad of the ruling fathers has been celebrated by us. Let us, however, survey another order in this progression, prolific, and vivific, and which is delivered by Plato in a divinely inspired manner. For the proximate decrements and generations from all the intellectual fathers, are unfolded into light in the assimilative gods, for here the partible progressions exist of things which there subsist uniformly, since it is lawful for progeny which everywhere are allotted an order inferior to their causes, to give multitude to the monads, and to multiply the stable hypostasis of them, and to render the energies of the simplicity, which is in first natures, more composite, as, therefore, from the paternal monad, Saturn, a triad subsists of ruling demiurgy, thus also from the vivific fountain Rhea, which is allotted the middle center in the intellectual gods, the vivific order of the assimilative gods is emitted, and here also there is a triad connect. Edly contained by one monad, since the paternal triad also subsists according to one perfect intellect, and was, as we have said, monadic, after the same manner, therefore, the triad which is the supplier of life is monadic, being indeed full of prolific power, and full of undefiled perfection. It likewise participates of the whole vivification, and through the rivers of life, fills all secondary natures with generative goods, and produces the vivific light, into the unenvying and exuberant participation of subordinate essences, and it converts indeed all things to itself, but is present to all things, and imparts to them its own appropriate powers. It likewise pervades from on high, as far as to the last parts of the world, but everywhere preserves the union of itself unmingled with its participants, and it embosoms indeed the generative, perfect, and beneficent light of the demiurgic monad, but weaves together with the third father, Pluto, the order of life, and co-arranges the boundaries of wholes in a becoming manner. In short, it extends itself from the middle to all the genera of rulers, both the first and the last, and together with them indeed, it perfects all secondary natures, and co-arranges that which is generative with the demiurgus. In addition to these things also, it illuminates all things with an analogous power, and connects the undefiled with the convertive peculiarity. For stable power pertains indeed to the demiurgic genera, but undefiled purity to the elevating genera. Plato, therefore, in the same manner as Orpheus, calls this triad by one name, but in a certain respect he also indicates the multitude of the powers it contains. For all the theology of the Greeks denominates the second vivification choric, i.e. virginal, and conjoins it with the whole vivific fountain. Plato also says, that it has its hypostasis from this fountain, and energizes together with it. For effects are never divulged from the providence of their causes, but wanderings indeed, and investigations, belong to the powers that energize providentially, just as participations according to periods pertain to the subjects of providential energy. The divine cause, however, of a partible life, i.e. Proserpine, conjoins herself from eternity with the whole vivific fountain, i.e. with res, which theologists call the mother of the ruling goddess, and Plato everywhere conjoins Proserpine with res, and he pre-establishes indeed the latter as a generative cause, but he celebrates the former as being filled from the latter, and filling secondary natures, since, however, the choric order is twofold, one indeed shining forth above the world, where it is also co-arranged with Jupiter, and constitutes with him the one demiurgus of partible natures, i.e. Bacchus, but the other, and which is secondary, shining forth in the world, where also it is said to be ravished by Pluto, and to animate the extremities of the universe, which are under the administration of Pluto. This being the case, Plato perfectly unfolds to us both these, at one time indeed conjoining Proserpine with res, but at another with Pluto, and evincing that she is the wife of this god. For the rumor of theologists who delivered to us the most holy mysteries in Eleusis, says, that above indeed, Proserpine abides in the dwellings of her mother, which her mother had fabricated in inaccessible places, exempt from the universe, but that beneath she governs terrestrial concerns in conjunction with Pluto, rules over the recesses of the earth, extends life to the extremities of the universe, and imparts soul to things which are of themselves inanimate, and dead, where also you may wonder that Proserpine associates with Jupiter indeed and Pluto, the former, as fables say violating, but the latter ravishing the goddess, but is not connected with Neptune, for he alone of the sons of Saturn, is not conjoined with Proserpine. The reason, however, of this is, that Neptune possessing the middle center in the triad, is allotted a vivific dignity and power, and is characterized according to this, from himself, therefore, he has the vivific cause, animates the whole of his proper allotment, and fills it with middle life from his own peculiarity. For Pluto indeed is the supplier of wisdom and intellect to souls according to Socrates in the Cratylus, but Jupiter is the cause of existence to beings, as the father of the triad. Proserpine, therefore, being co-arranged with the extremes, and prior to the world, with Jupiter indeed paternally, but in the world with Pluto, according to the beneficent will of the father, in the former case she is said to be violated by Jupiter, but in the latter, to be ravished by Pluto, in order that the first and last of fabrications may participate of vivification, for as the whole fountain of life, Rhea, being conjoined with the whole, according to one impartible cause, illuminates all things with life, thus also Proserpine, weaving in conjunction with the leaders of the universe, things first, middle, and last, illuminates them with the vivification of herself. Moreover, we may know from Plato, through these signs, the union of the whole triad, since denominating it core, i.e. virgin or Proserpine, he celebrates it with res. But again, we must survey where it is that he indicates the division of the triad, for there are three monads in it, and one of them is arranged, as being the highest, according to hypoxis, but another is arranged according to the power which is definitive of life, and another according to vivific intellect, and theologists indeed are accustomed to call the first of these choric, i.e. virginal, Diana, but the second Proserpine, and the third, choric Minerva. I speak, however, of the authors of the Grecian theology, since among the barbarians, i.e. the Chaldeans, the same things are manifested through other names, for they indeed call the first monad, Hecate, but the middle monad, soul, and the third, virtue, since, therefore, these things are made known to us after this manner by the names of the Greeks. Plato indeed indicates the order of choric Minerva, by denominating Minerva mistress, celebrating her as core, asserting that she is the cause of the whole of virtue, and calling her the lover of wisdom, and the lover of war, and also Ethono, as being intelligence in manners. For all these names sufficiently represent to us her intellectual and ruling nature, and that power of her which promptly supplies the whole of virtue. But in the same dialogue, he indicates the order of Proserpine, celebrating her as Ferifata, and employing this name, which is likewise used by all other theologists. These things he manifests in the Cratylus, where he unfolds the truth concealed in the name of Ferifata, and in the same dialogue he indicates the order of Diana, by calling her skillful in virtue. for it is evident that the whole triad being united to itself, the first monad of the triad, unically comprehends the third is converted to the firsts, and the middle has a power extending to both. There are, therefore, these three vivific monads, viz. Diana, Proserpine, and our mistress Minerva, and the first of these indeed is the summit of the whole triad, and which also converts to herself the third, but the second is a power vivific of wholes, and the third is a divine and undefiled intellect, comprehending in one, ruling manner, total virtues. Timos, therefore, manifests this, calling the third monad, Minerva. Philosophic, as being full of intellectual knowledge, and true wisdom, but philopolemic, as the cause of undefiled power, and the inspective guardian of the whole of fortitude. And again, the Athenian guest calls her core, as being a virgin, and as purifying from all conversion to externals. If, however, you are willing, we will survey the triad of core. From what is said in the Cratylus concerning Pherophata, she is called, therefore, wisdom, and is said to come into contact with that which is generated and borne along. She also produces fear in those that hear her name, and excites astonishment in the multitude. With respect to the appellation of wisdom, therefore, it is evident that it is a sign of the characteristic property of Minerva, and the summit of virtue. For if in us all the sciences are the first of the virtues, how is it possible that wisdom should not be rightly denominated the first effective cause of all the virtues? And if philosophy pertains to her, so far as she is wisdom, and immaterial intelligence, but not because she is indigent of wisdom, for no one of the gods, says Diotima, philosophizes, on this account, therefore, she is not indigent of wisdom, and the intellectual good of the ruling order entirely pertains to her, but to come into contact with that which is borne along, and with generation, will in a particular manner be adapted to soul, for it is soul that knows everything which is generated, and continually communicates with it. She, likewise, in a certain respect comes entirely into contact with that which is borne along. Moreover, the incommensurability of Pherophata with multitude, and the terror and astonishment which she excites, are indicative of the power in her which is exempt from all things, which is unapparent to the many and unknown. For the barbarians also, i.e. the Chaldeans, call the goddess who is the leader of this triad, dire and terrible. Hence Plato does not more clearly indicate these things to us about this mighty goddess, than the barbarians, but he announces names adapted to the theology concerning her, to the core, therefore, that is beneath, and that associates with Pluto. All the above-mentioned particulars are inherent according to participation, and, as someone might say, according to similitude to the total core, but they are inherent in the ruling core, according to the first hypostasis, and in reality these three goddesses are consubsistent, as, likewise, the whole vivific deity comprehends in herself the fountains of virtue and soul, which the demiurgus also imparts to the world, causing it to subsist perfectly. Thus too, this deity, core, possessing the primary cause of all the partible forms of life, possesses likewise the principle of souls, and of the virtues, and on this account, the assent to partial souls, such as ours, is through similitude, and virtue is a similitude to the gods. Hence also, the form of each of these, I mean of virtue and soul, presubsist in the assimilative gods, since, likewise, the immortality of souls is inferred by Socrates, from their similitude to divinity. If, therefore, they are allotted immortality essentially, it is indeed necessary that the cause which assimilates them to divinity, should primarily be in the gods, for they are assimilated to their fountain, but they participate of similitude from the assimilative causes. Hence in these, the cause of such an immortality of souls as this, shines forth. On this account also, Socrates arguing from similitude says, it is fit that souls should govern and despotically rule over bodies, since they are allotted the power of governing and despotically ruling, from the same cause from which they derive their similitude, to divinity, the one cause itself, therefore, of all the partible forms of life, pre-exists in the assimilative rulers, but one, whole, and impartible virtue exists prior to all the virtues which afford a similitude, to a divine nature, and neither is the essential similitude of souls, nor the similitude of virtue, derived from any other source than that of these rulers and principles. Since, however, there are, as we have said, triple monads in core, and one, indeed, establishes all things in itself, but another leads all things into generation, for it belongs to soul to generate, and another converts all things to itself. For this is the illustrious work of virtue, and since all things are perfectly prearranged in core, this being the case, the monad which associates with Pluto, participates, indeed, in a certain respect of the extremes, but is particularly allotted its progression according to the middle. Hence also, it is called Proserpine, because it comes into contact, as we have observed, with generation and things which are borne along. For the unmingled and the virginal are adapted to the extremes, but mixture, and our contact with generated natures, are adapted to the middle, which rejoices in progressions and multiplications. This ravishment therefore, of core, is indeed perfectly established in Proserpine, but she also imparts herself, and the vivification proceeding from herself to the last of things. Hence likewise, Socrates in the Cratylus co-arranges Proserpine with Pluto, but everywhere ranks total core with res, and comprehends her in the name of core. The power however, which proceeds from her to the realms beneath, he comprehends in the name of Proserpine, for the psychical nature is in this power essentially, but the remaining things are in it, as we have said, according to representation, and not primarily. And thus much concerning the vivific triad, since Plato has delivered to us but few auxiliaries about it, from which as from firestones rubbed against each other, it is possible to enkindle the light of truth. Chapter Zi. In the third place, let us discuss the elevating, among the ruling gods, and the triad which converts all things to their principle. For since there are three intellectual monads, as we have said, which are prearranged in the gods prior to these, three triads of the ruling gods proceed conformably to those monads, the paternal triad indeed, conformably to the first intellectual monad, whence also they are called the sons of Saturn, and are said to have divided the kingdom of their father, but the vivific triad conformably to the middle monad, whence also we are accustomed to co-arrange core with res as with a precedaneous cause, and the convertive triad, conformably to the third monad. Hence likewise we establish the peculiar cause of this triad in the demiurgus, for all the triads of the ruling gods, are suspended from the demiurgic monad, and the progression to all of them is from this. One of them however, he constitutes in conjunction with his father, another in conjunction with the vivific goddess, and another from the fountain in himself. For in the all-perfect demiurgus there are many fountains, which exist prior to all the second and third generations, for there the fountain of ideas subsists, according to which he adorns the universe, fashions the several particulars in it with forms and reasons, and arranges, and leads them into bound and morph. For the fountain of souls likewise, and the fountain of all the intellectual gods which proceed from him, are there, for he possesses a royal soul, and a royal intellect, according to the power of cause, as Socrates says, in the Philebus, for there also the fontal sun subsists. Hence Timos, after the generation of the seven bodies, and their position into total circulations, says, that the demiurgus enkindled that light which we now call the sun in the second of the revolutions from the earth, as affording an hypostasis to the sun from his own essence, for that which enkindles the whole sun, produces it, and constitutes that which is enkindled. The demiurgus therefore, possessing, and comprehending in himself the solar fountain, generates likewise in conjunction with the principles and rulers of wholes, solar powers, and the triad of solar gods, through which all things are elevated, perfected, and filled with intellectual goods, from one monad indeed, participating unpolluted light, and intelligible harmony, but from the remaining two, efficacious power, acme, and demiurgic perfection. How therefore, does Plato deliver to us these divine orders, and where does he indicate concerning them? Here then, he comprehends the whole triad through a name, in the same manner as he does the triad prior to it, and as there he manifests the whole genus of the vivific principles by the name of core, so likewise in these, he denominates the whole triad Apolloniacal, but he indicates the multitude in this triad by the many powers of this god. In the first place therefore, let us survey how Plato, in the same manner as Orpheus, considers the sun to be in a certain respect the same as Apollo, and how he venerates the communion of these gods. For Orpheus clearly says that the sun is the same with Apollo, and asserts this, as I may say, through the whole of his poetry. But the Athenian guest indicates this through the union of these divinities, constructing a common temple to Apollo and the sun, and at one time making mention of both, but at another, of one only, in consequence of their subsisting according to one union. But he says as follows: every year after the conversions of the sun from summer to winter, it is requisite that the whole city should assemble in the temple common to the Sun and Apollo, consecrating 3 of the citizens to the god. In these words therefore, speaking in common about both these divinities, that it is fit there should be a temple of Apollo and the Sun, into which it is necessary the whole city should assemble. After the summer solstice, he discourses in what follows about both, as if they were one, adding, that 3 of the citizens should be consecrated to the god, thus recurring from the division to the union of both. But elsewhere, he latently indicates the communion of them with each other, and again, in what follows, at one time he says that the citizens, consecrated to the god, should offer common first fruits to the Sun and Apollo, but at another to the Sun alone, in consequence of Apollo being in the Sun. According to Plato therefore, there is a kindred conjunction of these divinities, a communion of powers, and an ineffable union. Socrates also in the Cratylus, proposing to discover the essence of Apollo from his appellation, assents to the simplicity of his hypoxis, to his power of unfolding truth into light, and to his intellect which is the cause of knowledge, thus sufficiently indicating to us the unmultiplied, simple, and uniform nature of the god. But in the 6th book of the Republic, arranging the sun analogous to the good, and sensible light, to the light proceeding from the good to the intelligible, and calling the light which is present to the intelligible from the good, truth, connecting likewise intellect and the intelligible with each other, he evidently collects together these 2 series, I mean the Apolloniacal and the solar, for each of these is analogous to the good, but sensible light, and intellectual truth, are analogous to superessential light, and these 3 lights are successive to each other, viz. The divine, the intellectual, and sensible light, the last indeed pervading to sensibles from the visible sun, but the second extending from Apollo to intellectuals, and the first, from the good to intelligibles. Again therefore, these gods are demonstrated to be connivent with each other, according to their analogy to the good, but together with union, they have also a separation adapted to them. Hence by poets inspired by Phobos, the different generative causes and fountains of them are celebrated, from which being allotted their hypostasis, they are separated from each other, but they are likewise celebrated by these poets, as mutually connivent and united, and appraised by the appellations of each other. For the sun vehemently rejoices, to be celebrated in hymns as Apollo, and Apollo when he is invoked as the sun, benevolently causes the light of truth to shine forth. If therefore, the hypoxes of these divinities are united to, and subsist together with each other, but many powers of Apollo are delivered to us by Plato himself, and are happily allotted an appropriate theory, it is certainly proper to collect from these by a reasoning process, the solar progressions. But I say these things, looking to Socrates in the Cratylus, and his conceptions through images, which are there delivered, of the Apolloniacal powers, for the name of this god being one, unfolds all his powers, to the lovers of the contemplation of truth. This therefore is a very illustrious indication of the Apolloniacal peculiarity, viz. To collect multitude into one, to comprehend number in unity, to produce many things from one, and through intellectual simplicity to convolve to himself all the variety of secondary natures, and by one hypoxis to unite in one, multiform essences and powers. This Socrates says happens to the name Apollo, it being sufficient to signify in one, the various and different powers of the god, so that receiving his last image, and the most obscure representation from him, it is assimilated to his unific, and collective hypoxis, and contributes to our recollection of the Apolloniacal peculiarity. This one name therefore, possesses occultly many indications of the powers of the god, and by this simplicity indeed, which is exempt from multitude, the truth which the god through prophecy unfolds to secondary natures, is presented to our view, for the simple is the same with the true, but by the representation, in his name of dissolution and liberation, the purifying and undefiled nature of the god is signified, and also his power which is the saviour of wholes. By his emission of arrows, his power is indicated which is subversive of everything inordinate, confused, and incommensurate, through a cause which is the source of the ejaculation of arrows, and by his revolution, the harmonious motion of wholes, and the symphony which coalesces in itself, and binds all things, are indicated. Referring therefore, these 4 powers of the god to forms adapted to the powers, we may thus accommodate them to the solar monads. Hence the first of these monads is enunciative of truth and the intellectual light which subsists occultly in the gods themselves, but the second is subversive of everything confused, and exterminative of all disorder, and the third renders all things commensurate and friendly to each other, through harmonic reasons. An undefiled, however, and most pure cause presides over these monads, illuminating all things with perfection, and a subsistence according to nature, and expelling the contraries to these, of the solar triad. Therefore, the first monad, indeed, unfolds intellectual light, and announces it to all secondary natures, fills all things with total truth, and elevates them to the intellect of the gods, and this we say is the employment of the prophetic power of Apollo, viz. To lead forth into light the truth comprehended in divine natures, and to perfect that which is unknown to secondary natures. But the second and third monads emit efficacious and demiurgic acme, in order to the production of wholes, and perfect energy, according to which they adorn indeed everything sensible, but exterminate the inordinate and indefinite from the universe. And one of these monads is analogous to the production in wholes through music, and to the harmonious providence of things that are moved, but another is analogous to the power which is subversive of all disorder, and of the confusion and tumult which are contrary to form, and to the arrangement of wholes, and the remaining monad which supplies all things with an unenvying and exuberant communication of what is beautiful, which extends the beneficial, and imparts true blessedness, closes indeed the solar principles, but guards its triple progression. In a similar manner also, it illuminates ascending natures, with the perfect and intellectual measure of a happy life, presiding in the sun analogous to the purifying and Paeonian powers of the king Apollo. From what is written likewise in the Republic concerning the sun, we may be able to collect the same things by a reasoning process, for Socrates there gives to it a transcendency exempt from everything generated, and says that it is established above things which are born, along in a sensible nature, just as the good is perfectly exempt from intelligibles. He likewise says that the sun generates sense, that which is sensible, and generated natures, just as the good produces essence and true being, and is antecedently the cause of intellect and intelligibles. If, therefore, this sensible world is generated and generation, as Timaeus says, and a divine generated nature, as it is asserted in the Republic, but the sun is beyond generation, as Socrates affirms, and in short, is allotted an essence different from sensibles, it is perfectly evident that it is allotted a supermundane order in the world, and exhibits an unbegotten transcendency in generated natures, and an intellectual dignity in sensibles. Hence, Timaeus also delivers a twofold progression of the sun from the demiurgus, one indeed being co-arranged with the other planets, but the other exempt, supernatural, and unknown. For the demiurgus, when producing the 7 bodies of the planets, and placing them in their proper circulations, at the same time constitutes the sun with the other planets, arranging the moon the first from the earth, but the sun in the second circulation, and after these, he enkindles a light in the solar sphere, similar to none of the others, nor does he receive this light from the subject matter, but himself produces and generates it from himself, and extends as it were from certain addita to mundane natures, a symbol of intellectual essences, and unfolds to the universe that which is arcane in the gods that are above the world. Hence also the sun when he first appeared, astonished the mundane gods, and all of them were desirous to dance round him, and to be filled with his light. This world likewise is beautiful in solar form, as we have said. Therefore, from the fabrication of the universe, in the Timaeus, the sun is demonstrated to possess this order beyond sensibles, and to be allotted an essence above everything which is generated, but everything in the world receives from him perfection and essence. Hence also, Socrates in the Republic calls the sun the offspring of the good, the demiurgus of a generated nature, and the author of all mundane light. These things, therefore, we must likewise understand analogously about the ruling order of the god, for they are thence communicated to this visible sun, and on this account, here also, the sun is allotted an exempt transcendency with respect to the gods in the world, because he possesses our precedaneous hypostasis among the leaders and rulers of wholes. Farther still, in those gods likewise, the first effective cause of light subsists, generating those supermundane and intellectual rays, through which souls, and all the more excellent genera obtain an elevating progression. With these gods also, there is the demiurgic duad which produces both simple and composite natures, those that are of a more ruling, and those that are of an inferior order, and in short, this demiurgic duad governs the twofold coordinations of the world. Hence those who are wise in divine concerns call this primary cause. of light, and the demiurgic duad as being efficacious, motive, and fabricative of wholes, but they establish them to be twofold, the one indeed being dexter, but the other sinister, which things also Timos admits to be primarily in the celestial periods, and says that this division is derived from the first demiurgus. If, therefore, the demiurgic monad constituted the solar order prior to the world, why is it wonderful that in that order he should establish this division according to the right and left? For Socrates also calls the motive powers of the Parker hands, and says that the eldest of the three moves the universe with both her hands, so that we must not refuse to transfer the name of hands to divine concerns. Moreover, will not likewise the last of the solar principles according to Plato be that from which the interpreters of divine concerns say, a happy life, and unpolluted fruits are derived to wholes, since he calls the sun the offspring of the good, and this essentially pertains to it, for it is evident that as the good extends felicity to all beings, thus also the sun extends to mundane nature's measures of felicity adapted to each, and gives completion to this through similitudes, and a tendency to the whole demiurgus. Hence also I think, Phylic. It is said to consist in an assimilation to divinity, and felicity pertains to all the gods in the world, according to the one ruling cause of them, for thence perfection and blessedness flow upon all things. Chapter Ziii. And thus much, following Plato, we have collected by a reasoning process, concerning these particulars. We shall add, however, to what has been said, the theory pertaining to the unpolluted gods, among the ruling divinities, for Plato also gives us an opportunity of mentioning these, since it is necessary that the rulers and leaders of wholes should subsist analogous to the intellectual kings, though they make their progression in conjunction with division and a separation into parts, for as they imitate the paternal, generative, and convertive powers of the intellectual kings, thus also it is necessary that they should deceive the immutable monads in themselves, according to the ruling peculiarity, and establish over their own progression secondary causes of a garden characteristic, and the mystic tradition indeed of Orpheus, makes mention of these more clearly, but Plato being persuaded by the mysteries, and by what is performed in them, indicates concerning these unpolluted gods. And in the laws indeed he reminds us of the inflation of the pipe by the Corybantes, which represses every inordinate and tumultuous motion, but in the Euthydemus, he makes mention of the collocation on a throne, which is performed in the Corybantic mysteries, just as in other dialogues he makes mention of the curatic order, speaking of the arm sports of the curates, for they are said to surround and to dance round the demiurgus of wholes, when he was unfolded into light from rear. In the intellectual gods, therefore, the first curatic order is allotted its hypostasis, but the order of the Corybantes which precedes Cor, i.e. Proserpine, and guards her on all sides, as the Theology says, is analogous to the curates in the intellectual order. If, however, you are willing to speak according to Platonic custom, because these divinities preside over purity, and preserve the curatic order undefiled, and also preserve immutability in their generations, and stability in their ancient natures, will through these very things become perfectly known to us. What, therefore, are the peculiarities of this order, which is celebrated as of a ruling and leading nature by others, but is demonstrated by arguments to be of an assimilative nature? Everything then which is assimilative, imparts the communication of similitude, and of communion with paradigms to all the beings that are assimilated by it. Together with the similar, however, it produces and commingles the dissimilar, since in the images of the similar, the genus of similitude is not naturally adapted to be present, separate from its contrary. If, therefore, this order of gods assimilates sensibles to intellectuals, and produces all things posterior to itself according to an imitation of causes, it is indeed the first effective cause of similitude to natures posterior to itself. But if it is the cause of this, it is also of the dissimilitude which is coordinate with similitude, for it is necessary that all things which participate of the similar, should also participate of the dissimilar, and this order of gods indeed imparts the similar in a greater degree than the dissimilar to the progeny that are more proximate to their principles, but it constituted the essence of things that proceed farther from their principles, according to dissimilitude rather than similitude. For, in short, similitude will have in itself an hypostasis analogous to the paternal causes, and to the causes which convert to principles, but the hypostasis of dissimilitude is analogous to prolific causes, and to those that preside over multitude and division. For similitude indeed proceeds analogous to intelligible bound, but dissimilitude to intelligible infinity. Hence the former is collective, but the latter separative of progressions. Since, however, every divine nature begins its own energy from itself, and though its energy is directed to secondary natures, and it imparts its own peculiarity to things subordinate, yet it establishes and defines itself according to that energy, prior to other things. This being the case, that which supplies other things with the participation of the similar and the dissimilar, from itself, will entirely possess in itself this similitude and dissimilitude. It is also mingled from both these, though here similitude is emitted in a greater degree, and there dissimilitude. For generative are united to paternal causes, and unpolluted causes to those that hasten to proceed to everything. Twofold coordinations likewise of the divine genera, are connected with each other, energized together with, and subsist in each other. For the genus of the ruling gods, is similar and dissimilar to itself, and to other things, but being similar and dissimilar to itself, it conjoins itself to, and separates itself from its principles, preserving the proper boundaries of progression. That, however, which is similar and dissimilar to other things, converts and congregates other things to itself, and separates them from itself. Such, therefore, are the peculiarities of these gods, but that the similar and the dissimilar proceed from the demiurgic monad, and the signs which there pre-exist, into this order, Parmenides sufficiently demonstrates to us. For the demiurgic same and different, are the antecedently existing causes, as he says, of the similitude and dissimilitude in this order. Since, however, though this order of gods is the summit of the partible genera, and of genera which energize partably, yet it has a total transcendency with respect to them, in order that being in continuity with the total orders of the gods, its progression may not be separately allotted its generation from divided causes, but that each of the opposites, as it were, may proceed from the whole demiurgus. For the similar is from same and different, and the dissimilar receives its hypostasis from both these, and thus each participates of the whole demiurgic monad, and this is an indication of total hypoxis, viz. To refer each of the parts that are, as it were different, to the whole. Sameness, therefore, and difference generate similitude, but the one ended paternally, and the other in an unpolluted manner, and the one generatively, but the other separatively, and again, each constitutes dissimilitude in a manner appropriate to itself, and thus the genera of the assimilative gods are varied, subsisting as paternal, generative, and collective of wholes, for they are allotted their evolution into light, doubled according to pre-existent causes, and the demiurgic duad energizing through each of the causes that are pre-established in him, makes a progression from each into secondary natures. The whole conclusions, likewise, are dyadic, or pertaining to the duad, but they are comprehended by the demiurgic tetrad in pre-arranged boundaries, and the multitude of the assimilative progressions is convolved to union, by the simplicity of the intellectual genera. Each also of the progressions, has indeed one progression supernatural and unknown to the multitude, but the other apparent and known to all. I mean, for instance, that the similar, so far as it is constituted by difference, has a progress sign from thence difficult to be known, but that so far as it proceeds from sameness, it exhibits a manifest reason of cause. After the same manner, dissimilitude has difference for the manifest principle of its proper hypoxis, but sameness, for its principle difficult to be known. Hence also Parmenides beginning from things unknown to the multitude, and which are alone apparent to science and intellect, ends in things which are known to all men, and are effable. For in the gods themselves, the ineffable precede the effable, and the latent and unknown mode of their hypostasis, precedes that which is known according to progression, and thus much concerning these gods from the Parmenides of Plato. Chapter XV. Making, however, another beginning, let us discuss the orders that follow successively, since the partial orders of the gods, therefore, are divided in a threefold manner, according to the all-perfect measure of the triad, proceeding supernally from the first intelligibles, as far as to the last of things, measuring and defining all things as the oracles say. The ruling gods, indeed, are allotted the first and highest rank among the partial orders, making their progression proximately after the intellectual order, elevating secondary natures and conjoining them with the demiurgus of wholes, unfolding all impartible and united intellectual goods to things subordinate, and connecting and containing exemptly, their essence and perfection. but the gods who give completion to the sensible world are allotted the last order, and close the end of the divine progression. These divide the universe, and obtain perpetual allotments and receptacles in it, and through these weave one and the best polity of the world. Between these mundane gods, however, who are our rulers and saviors, and the supermundane leaders, those gods subsist who preside over the separable and at the same time inseparable order of sensibles, and define according to this their proper progression, being at one and the same time exempt from the gods in the universe, and co-arranged with them, and they are expanded, indeed, above the allotment which is adequate to the divided parts of the world, and supernally ascend into many numbers of the mundane gods, but they make a progression subordinate to the government which extends to all things and to wholes. For in short, being the media between the supermundane and mundane gods, they in a certain respect communicate with both, and have an indissoluble communion with both, being mundane, and at the same time supermundane according to order, and above indeed, they are united by the ruling leaders, but beneath, they are produced into multitude by the junior gods, as Tzimos says, for they ride on the mundane gods, and are in an undefiled manner established on their summits, but they are suspended from the supermundane gods, and subsist about them. They are also more united than the former, but are more multiplied than the latter, and they divide indeed, the whole monads of the supermundane gods, into perfect numbers, but they collect the multitudes and the numbers of the mundane gods into united bounds, converting these gods to their exempt principles, but calling forth the gods that are above the world into the generation and providential care of sensible natures, and immutably preserving in themselves a middle form of empire, for the middle bonds give completion to all the genera of the gods, thus in intelligibles, between the intelligible and occult order, and the paradigmatic triad. And all perfect multitude, the intelligible center subsists, being parturient indeed, with multitude in the first forms, but vanquished by the uniform comprehension of the first order. Again, in intelligibles and intellectuals, the connective genus extending from the middle to all the extremes, conjoins and binds all their essences, powers and providential energies, after the same manner therefore, in these orders also, viz. In the kings exempt from, and in those that are co-arranged with the universe, those gods that emit in themselves uniformly the peculiarities of both these kings, afford a communication to them with each other, whence also it belongs to them to transport first to second natures, to convert second to first natures, to unite both by an indissoluble connection, and to guard the whole order in the world, the immutable, therefore, the inflexible, the indissoluble in providential energies, dominion over wholes, the administration of many partible allotments of the gods at once, and the elevating to supermundane perfection many of their progressions and orders, pertain to these gods. Hence, we are accustomed to celebrate this genus of gods as liberated, in consequence of being freed from all division. According to parts, a supercelestial, in consequence of proximately establishing itself above the gods in the heavens, as undefiled, in consequence of not verging to subordinate natures, nor dissolving its exempt transcendency by a providential attention to the world, as elevating, in consequence of extending the mundane gods to the intellectual and intelligible place of survey, and as perfect, in consequence of illuminating all the celestial with the measures of perfection. Since therefore, this order is in continuity with the assimilative rulers, but is arranged prior to the mundane gods, it is indeed proper to evince that the theology pertaining to it is suspended from the doctrine concerning the ruling gods, and at the same time affords from itself the principles of the conceptions about the sensible gods. Chapters v. The intelligible king, 3, therefore, of all intellectuals, luminously emitting from himself the first causes, and which measure wholes, according to the all-perfect triad in himself, defines all wholes as far as to the last of things, and triples the progressions of the gods from himself, so as to generate indeed 3 orders, but refer each of them to one monad, and an intelligible transcendency. On this account he constitutes 3 collective, 3 connective, and 3 perfective causes of all intellectuals, extending the triadic light to all things, and imparting by illumination the perfect in the progressions of its proper offspring, to the beginnings, middles, and ends of all separated natures. But again, the demiurgus and father, imitating his father and grandfather, 4, to the latter of whom he extends his total intelligence, being the same in intellectuals, as he is in intelligibles, and terminating the genus of the intellectual fathers, in the same manner as his grandfather closes the paternal profundity of intelligibles, produces from himself 3 orders of gods, and as the total progressions were divided from his grandfather triadically, so the partial progressions are perfected on account of him, according to the triad. Hence, there are also 3 orders from the demiurgus, but they proceed according to the end adapted to each, and one of them indeed, is supermundane alone, another is mundane, and another is in a certain respect the middle of both. They are likewise allotted the triple proximately from the paternal cause, but each derives the peculiarity of hyparxis from definite principles, and a diminution proceeding according to measures, for they have neither an hypostasis of equal dignity, as mathematical monads have in the triad, nor a disorderly difference of dignity, but they receive the difference of a subordinate essence, and arrangement in their generation from the first causes, and thus, the ruling gods indeed, are allotted the highest order in the partial progressions, and the exempt cause of the preceding natures, but the liberated gods are allotted the second order, being arranged indeed under the ruling, but riding on the mundane gods, and the mundane gods are allotted the third order, being elevated through the liberated, but united by the ruling, to the intellectual gods. In what manner however, the gods in the world and all the mundane genera participate of the ruling gods, we have already shown, but each of the mundane genera enjoy the energy of the liberated governors of the universe, according to a measure adapted to each, and especially such as are able to follow the powers of these gods, for in the gods themselves, we may perceive a twofold energy, the one indeed, being co-arranged with the subjects of their providential care, but the other being exempt and separate. According therefore, to the first of these energies, the mundane gods govern sensibles, and convolve, and convert them to themselves, but according to the other, they follow the liberated gods, and together with them are elevated to an intelligible nature, and on this account, the Allingests makes the periods of the whole world, and of each of the gods in it to be twofold, for, he says, that the sun, and each of the heavenly bodies, subsist according to both these circulations, viz. The intellectual and the mundane, or, if you are willing so to speak, according to the power which is motive of secondary natures, and the power which ascends in conjunction with the liberated gods. Moreover, he says, that our souls, and all the natures that have a life separate from bodies, at one time live according to that elevating progression, and at another according to the mundane, and now indeed we proceed from youth to old age, since we have departed from a flourishing and undefiled life, and are born to earth, and generation, but then on the contrary, we proceeded from old age to youth, on which account, we were led round to a flourishing, intellectual, and liberated form of energy. Hence, also, the corporeal nature, with which we are connected, was gradually obliterated, and whatever causes us to tend downward, and renders us inseparable from the universe, but an incorporeal, and immaterial nature shone forth, and was filled with the gods who are the leaders of a life of this kind. If also, you are willing, we may collect the same thing by a reasoning process, from what is written in the Phaedrus. Socrates, therefore, says in that dialogue, that the soul which is perfect and winged, revolves on high, and governs the whole world, and that this will be the case with our soul, when it arrives at the summit of a happy life. But this is in a much greater degree present with the genera superior to us, and with the gods themselves, for our souls obtain this end, and this true blessedness, through the gods. For whence do you think, and from what other causes, is a disencumbered energy, and which has dominion over wholes, imparted to us, and to the genera in the world more excellent than us, but from the liberated gods? For each of the mundane gods obtains the administration of its allotment, and of the proper series over which it rules, and which it constitutes about itself, according to the will of the Father. For the demiurgus arranges under the several mundane gods, the heads of daemons, and partial souls, as Samos says, but to energize through the whole world, is a supernatural good, and the peculiarity of the exempt government of the supercelestial gods. Hence, from these this good is imparted to the mundane gods, and to our souls. Or how can that which is partial extend its proper energy to the whole, and how departing from its own divided peculiarity, can it change its life? For that which directs its energy to the universe, withdraws itself from an energy which is arranged in a part. We must not therefore say, that this divine good is by any means present to mundane natures from any other source than these gods, who establish their kingdom proximately above the world, as, therefore, the progression to all things through similitude, and the conversion according to similitude to causes, are imparted from the assimilative rulers to the celestial gods, to the more excellent genera, and to us. Thus also, that which is liberated from partial natures, which is disencumbered and which tends spontaneously to many energies, is an impression derived from the liberated rulers, and thus much concerning the providence of these rulers which pervades to all things, and the goods which they impart to subordinate natures. But we shall add to what has been before said, the peculiarity of their essence, according to which they are allotted this order. Chapters Viii. From the intellectual, 5, gods, therefore, i.e. from the assimilative rulers, an immaterial and divine intellect is suspended, but a separate and total intellect is an intellect of this kind. Hence also these gods are called intellectual, for according to their hypoxes, they are beyond essence and multitude, but according to the participations of them which receive the illumination of a progression of this kind, they are called assimilative, for because they have intellectual hypostasis, and perfect powers, since intellect is the last of their participants, and the intellectual peculiarity defines their whole essence, hence they are allotted this appellation, of the mundane gods. Indeed, an intellectual nature participates primarily, an undefiled soul also participates of them, and that portion of the world together with which they render the whole world, an intellectual and divine harmony. Emitting the splendor of themselves as far as to bodies, and imparting to these a vestige of their own peculiarity, it is necessary, therefore, that the orders which are between both these, should rejoice in certain additions, by which they are more multitudinous than the intellectual gods, and in progressions into participants, but that they should be more singular and simple than the mundane gods, for the diminutions of the divine essences multiply the receptacles that are suspended from them. Hence, together with the intellectual peculiarity, these gods assume the psychical power, in order that by the incorporeal nature, they may have the supermundane property, but by the psychical, they may be more manifold than the intellectual gods. For again, considering the affair in another way, since soul presents itself to the view, and the one fountain of whole souls, in pure intellectuals, and constitutes all things in conjunction with the demiurgus, is it not necessary that the supermundane god should participate of the psychical peculiarity? For the gods that are divided about the world, are not filled with the unical soul without a medium, but through other more total media, which do not proceed out of the monad, i.e., out of Juno, or the crater, and possess an eternal life. From thence, therefore, that is, from the crater of souls, the presence of soul is derived to the ruling and liberated gods. For the demiurgus Jupiter also, as Socrates says in the Philebus, possessing in himself a royal soul, and a royal intellect, according to the reason of cause, and generating according to the whole of himself those gods that are of a ruling characteristic among the supermundane and mundane divinities, entirely likewise imparts the intellectual and the psychical peculiarity. But the supermundane gods indeed, being primarily unfolded into light, participate more of an intellectual essence. Hence also, the psychical peculiarity is in them occultly, but the gods who are allotted the middle order, cause the psychical peculiarity, indeed, to shine forth, yet subsisting with a more abundant separation, than in the supermundane gods. The mundane gods, however, perfectly unfold the psychical peculiarity into light, since intellect also, was indeed occultly in the first intellectuals, but exhibits a forerunning light in the middle, and shines forth in the last intellectuals. And the supermundane gods, indeed, being perfectly supermundane, derive the power of soul from the intellectual, 6, crater, or the royal soul in the demiurgus, but they pre-establish in themselves another monad of the divided psychical genera. The liberated, however, now communicating in essence with the mundane gods, have the psychical peculiarity from a twofold source, i.e. from the fountain of total animations, and from the assimilative principle. And in the last place, the mundane gods receive the illuminations of all the divinities prior to them. Hence also, they rule over the universe, imitating the liberated gods, adorn sublunary natures with forms, and assimilate them to intellectual paradigms, imitating the ruling gods. They likewise pour forth the whole of the life which is inseparable from body, from the one fountain of souls, establishing it as an image of the life which is separate from a corporeal nature, and conjoin themselves to this fountain. In short, all the genera, 7, being mingled by the demiurgus in the fountain of souls, in order to the generation of the different ranks of souls. Some of these ranks of one thing, but others are different thing at hand, and in some indeed, the essential has dominion over the remaining genera, in others sameness, and in others differ. Hence, but those souls that are connoissant with the assimilative gods, have their whole hypostasis according to essence, hence they are near to an intellectual hypoxis, and are allotted in the genera of souls, an intelligible and occult transcendency. But those that are co-arranged with the liberated gods, characterize their proper progression, according to sameness, hence also, they are consubsistent with the gods that bind together and congregate the supermundane and mundane gods, and those souls that are co-divided with the mundane gods, define the essence of themselves according to difference, and on this account also, the demiurgus, in constituting the soul of the universe, is said to co-adapt difference to other souls by force. Moreover, the separation into parts in these, the union through harmony, and the energy according to time are effected through the illuminations of difference. But, in the souls, above these essence and sameness subsists, with which there are eternal life, and a union of powers, and thus much concerning these particulars. From what has been said, however, we may collect by a reasoning process, that intellect, essence, and intellectual life, are suspended from the liberated gods. In them also soul, and the nature of the super-celestial souls shine with a forerunning light, for they are established above the celestial gods who ride in bodies, just as the celestial gods are exempt from the sublunary divinities, and from those who are allotted the government of matter. If, however, the genus of the liberated gods is of this kind, they are very properly said to belong to the partial orders, in the same manner as the gods prior to them, but they indeed are more total, because the psychical peculiarity was in them occultly. But the liberated gods have that which is partial in providential energies more apparent, because the psychical power also in these is more manifest, just as the mundane gods who now preside over partial allotments, perfectly unfold into light the psychical essence. The whole, however, and impartible genera of the gods shine forth as far as to the intellectual hypostasis, for intellect according to its own nature is impartible. The liberated leaders, therefore, being such as we have shown them to be, let us survey the multiform orders of them adapted to this order. Some of them, therefore, we call transporters, and these are such as unfold to secondary natures, the progressions of the assimilative genera, but others are elevators, who draw upward the mundane orders, to a separate energy. Others are colligators, who administer equally the communion of the extremes. Others are undefiled, and these are such as entirely obliterate matter, and impart by illumination the disencumbered to the providential energies of secondary natures. Others are perfective, and these are such as are the supplies of perfection to mundane natures. And others are prolific, who multiply the progressions of subordinate essences. For according to these, and far more numerous powers, incomprehensible by our conceptions, they preside over the gods in the world, and give completion to the divine genera which subsist between the gods that are exempt, and those that are co-arranged with the parts of the universe. Moreover, we must assign to them energies in symphony with their powers, viz. Such energies as are disencumbered, everywhere apparent, amputating everything material, and corporeal formed, emitting an idea undefiled, without contact, and incorporeal, and converting all secondary natures to themselves, and extending them to intellectual light. And farther still, we must ascribe to them energies that unfold the exempt principles of the universe, and also energies more excellent than these, which draw upward to the intellectual gods, and others still more elevated which can join themselves with the intellectual gods, and exhibit an essence uncolored, unfidualed, and without contact. Again, according to another mode, we must admit that some of their energies operate about the secondary gods, and are collectors of their divine unities to a union prior to the world, but others operate about the mundane intellects, and extend the intellections of them from coordinate intelligibles to such as are first, and exempt from the universe. Others again, are elevators of souls to the one fountain of them, and some of their energies, indeed, are the leaders of divine souls themselves, but others preside over the genera that are more excellent than us, and others convolve the multitude of intelligible souls, 8, to an undefiled life. For being as it were certain leaders of herds, they ascend supernally into all the natures in the world, and as daemon gods, they proximately rule over gods, and are the leaders of the progression to the intelligible, to some in one, and to others in a different way, according to the order which is adapted to the elevated natures, for everything, mundane, participates of the liberated gods, but the participation is different, for it is either according to the divine, daemoniacal, and partible, or according to the uniform, intellectual, and psychical, for all things, as I may say, are allotted a separate life, a disencumbered energy, a supernatural providence, and a common prefecture, from this order of gods. Let the common definition, therefore, of the liberated gods, be such as this. Chapters Viii. In the next place it follows that we should unfold the theory of Plato, first, that which may be obtained in other dialogues, and afterwards, the all-perfect doctrine concerning these gods, which is to be found in the Parmenides. In the Phaedrus therefore, Socrates energizing enthusiastically, and expanding his intellect to the whole connection of the divine orders, and not only mystically surveying the mundane progressions of them, but also their indescribable and blessed visions, and discursive energies above. The world divides indeed, in a threefold manner, all the separate hypostases in the world, from the subjects of their government, and he calls the first of these hypostases divine, but the middle demoniacal, and he gives completion to the last from our souls. He also suspends partial souls, such as ours, from daemons, hence he denominates them co-attendants, and extends them through daemons as media, to the divine empire, but he suspends the demoniacal orders from the mundane gods, for daemons are the attendants of these. He refers however, these whole divine principalities, the demoniacal herds, and choirs of partial souls, to the liberated order, and he says that the triadic army of mundane souls is elevated under this order, to the intellectual and intelligible gods, together at the same time with their first causes. Here therefore, he defines according to the measure of the dodecad, i.e. the number 12, all this liberated gods, though the multitude of them is incomprehensible, and not to be numbered by human conceptions, and though none of those theologists that have written anything concerning them, have been able to define their whole number, in the same manner as they have the ruling multitude, i.e. the multitude of supermundane gods, or the multitude of the intellectual, or intelligible gods. Plato however, apprehended that the number of the dodecad is adapted to the liberated gods, as being all perfect, composed from the first numbers, and completed from things perfect, and he comprehends in this measure all the progressions of these gods, for he refers all the genera and peculiarities of them to this dodecad, and defines them according to it. But again dividing the dodecad into two monads and one decad, he suspends all mundane natures from the two monads, but delivers to us each of these energizing on the monad posterior to itself, according to its own hyparxis, and one of these monads indeed, he calls Jovian, but he denominates the other Vesta. He likewise makes mention of other more partial principalities, and which give completion to the aforesaid decad, such as those of Apollo, Mars, and Venus, and he suspends indeed, the prophetic form of life from the Apolloniacal principality, but the amatory from the principality of Venus, and the divisive, from that of Mars, for hence the most total and first genera of lives are derived, just as when he introduces into the world souls recently fashioned, he says that some preside over one, and others over another form of life, and it appears to me, that as Samos makes the division of souls, at one time supermundane, but at another mundane, for he distributes souls equal in number to the stars, and disseminates one into the moon, another into the earth, and others into the other instruments of time. After the same manner also Socrates prearranges twofold rulers and leaders of them, proximately indeed the mundane gods, but in a still higher rank than these, the liberated gods. As we have said however, the 12 gods convolve every mundane genus, whether it be divine, or demoniacal, to the vision of intelligibles, and perfect by separate energy. They likewise comprehend in themselves all the super-celestial genera, so that whether there be a paternal genus of the liberated gods, or a vivific, or an undefiled and guardian genus, they are comprehended in this number. For this number must not be surveyed as if it was such as 12 is in units, for number in the gods is not of this kind, but it must be beheld in the peculiarity of hyparxis, for as the duad in the gods presides over prolific power, and the triad over the first perfection, thus also the dodecad, in the gods, is our symbol of all perfect progression, for since these gods close the end of the powers that are unapparent and exempt from the world, and ride on the celestial gods, according to each of these, the dodecad pertains to them, viz. it belongs to them as terminating the all perfect in the progression of the supermundane, and as presiding over the celestial gods, for they impart to the latter a distribution from themselves into the dodecad, and especially guard them in this number. The ruling dodecad therefore, was all perfectly supermundane, but the celestial, is evidently mundane only, and the dodecad of the liberated rulers contains the communion of the extremes, and binds the order posterior, to that which is prior to itself, and on this account indeed, the liberated gods are perfective of the mundane gods, and led them upward, but they are proximately suspended from the ruling gods, are emitted from them, and administer the indissoluble connection of both, i.e. of the supermundane and mundane gods. Chapter 6. That we may not however present the reader with our conceptions, but may unfold to the utmost of our power the theory of Plato, to the lovers of the contemplation of truth, let us consider by ourselves, where those leaders must be arranged, which Socrates celebrates in the Phaedrus, and with whom it is fit to connumerate, and with what orders of gods, it is proper to co-arrange the great ruler of those leaders, who drives a winged chariot, for it is necessary either to give to him an intellectual, or an assimilative, or a liberated, or a mundane order, for these are the decrements accompanying the progression of the great god Jupiter. If however, be as the intellectual Jupiter, whom we have denominated the demiurgus of the universe, and have made Plato bear testimony to our assertion, how is he the leader of the above-mentioned dodecad, and how is he divided oppositely to the principality of Vesta? For the demiurgic monad closes indeed the intellectual breadth, but is exempt from all other numbers, and uncoordinated with all the monads of other numbers, for it neither was, nor is lawful for effects to have an hypostasis opposed in division to their causes. It is not therefore proper to make 12 leaders of wholes, but to make the number of causes to be one, as Samos says. Moreover, Jupiter the demiurgus is exempt from the universe, as being himself the author of the apparent order of things. But the first of the 12 leaders, is said by Socrates to drive a winged chariot in the heavens. How therefore, can he who is connected with the world, and who approximates to the gods in the heavens, be considered as the same with him who is exempt from all mundane natures, and who abides, as Samos says, in his own accustomed manner? Farther still, this Jupiter indeed, presides over a philosophic life, and souls, that follow him, perpetually lead this life. But another god presides over the prophetic, amatory, and poetic life. The demiurgus of wholes, however, contains in himself the paradigms of all lives, and as he uniformly comprehends the essence of souls, after the same manner also, he comprehends all the different mutations of their lives. He is not, therefore, divisibly the cause of the lives in the soul, but pre-establishes according to one demiurgic cause, all the periods of souls, all the variety, and all the measures of life. And as the mundane sun is not the cause of some things, but the demiurgus of others, but of whatever the sun is the author, the demiurgus is in a greater degree the fabricator, and precedaneous cause. Thus also in the lives of souls, it is not proper to refer the cause to the demiurgus in a divided manner, for the demiurgic monad presides as the impartible, common, and one cause of all lives, but the divisions according to lives, and the different paradigms of mundane natures, pertain to the gods posterior to him. If, however, someone should think that we ought to abandon this hypothesis, but that we should assert this Jupiter, and the other leaders to be mundane, where must we arrange the gods that follow him? For Socrates says, that the army of gods and daemons divided into 11 parts, follows Jupiter, for there are more comprehensive and partial orders of gods in the universe than these, and some of them have the relation of leaders, but others of followers. The magnitude, however, of the principality celebrated by Socrates, does not manifest to us a transcendency co-arranged with, but exempt from mundane natures, for in incorporeal causes, the great imparts our peculiarity of this kind to those to whom it is present, and as love being not simply called a daemon by deity, but a great daemon, is demonstrated to be expanded above all daemons, and is a god, but is not arranged in the genus of daemons, thus also Jupiter, being celebrated as the great leader, not as the mundane leader of mundane natures, but as exempt from, and transcending the mundane order, is allotted this appellation. But if Jupiter is exempt from the gods in the world, it is necessary that the other leaders also should have an essence antecedent to those that follow Jupiter, for all of them are allotted a ruling dignity. But if the other leaders are arranged as mundane, and Jupiter alone is a leader beyond these, again we must transfer the whole principality from the dodecad, to the Jovian monad. It is necessary, however, to attribute a ruling power to all of them, and to preserve to Jupiter the principal authority among them. It remains, therefore, that a principality such as this of the gods, must either be that of the assimilative gods, or of those that are allotted a liberated dominion in the universe, as, we say it must. If, however, we should admit it to belong to the assimilative orders, it will be the leader of a demiurgic triad, but not of the dodecad which is now celebrated. The Jupiter, therefore, who is among the assimilative gods, and whom we have before unfolded, is the first of the sons of Saturn, for these sons, as Socrates says, in the Gorgias, divide the whole kingdom of Saturn, and the first of them indeed is the author of firsts, the second of middle, and the third of last natures. The division, therefore, of mundane natures being threefold, the first of the sons of Saturn may be called the leader of the Triadic division, and the multitude proximately suspended from him will be the first of the Triadic division in the universe. But the leader of the 12 gods presides over an army distributed into 11 parts, hence the one defines his proper dominion in the thirds of wholes, but the other in the 12ths, and according to the power of comprehension, one of them defines his principality conformably to the triad, but the other according to the endecad, or the number 11. By no means, therefore, is each of these allotted the same order. The demiurgus, therefore, and Saviour Jupiter is uncoarranged with all these, but live assimilative Jupiter is the leader of the division of wholes into a triad, and the mundane Jupiter is among the number of leaders that follow, and not of those that are exempt. The Jupiter, however, who is celebrated by Socrates in the Phaedrus, is co-arranged with the other leaders, and presides over those that are disposed in an orderly manner according to 11 parts, and not over those that receive a tripartite division, and he is also exempt from all mundane natures on account of the magnitude of his ruling transcendency. Hence he is different from all the above-mentioned orders, and exhibits, in no one of them the peculiarity which is now presented to our view. It remains, therefore, that we should conumerate him with the liberated gods, in order that he may be proximate to the mundane gods, and on this account he is said to be in the heavens, and to be exempt from the mundane divinities. On this account, likewise, he is celebrated as great, for frequently media present themselves to our view, from the extremes being surveyed according to mixture. Since therefore, Jupiter is said to drive a winged chariot in the heavens, and is denominated great, he is in a certain respect co-arranged with the celestial gods, and is exempt from them. But he who is at one and the same time co-arranged with the gods in the universe, among whom the celestial Jupiter is allotted the highest dignity, and is exempt from them, ranks among the liberated gods, if in what has been before said, we have rightly determined. Hence, of the gods, some are exempt from the universe, but others give completion to it, and others are at one and the same time allotted a co-arranged, and an exempt transcendency. This great leader in the heavens therefore Jupiter, is liberated and supercelestial, and the whole dodecad shines forth in this order of gods, for there is one all-perfect and divine number, to which the 12 leaders give completion, so that it is necessary the whole number should be placed in this order of gods, but we must not call in a divided manner some of the leading and ruling gods mundane, and others supermundane. But if the first of them is supermundane, the rest also will after the same manner establish themselves above the gods in the world. Each also is the leader of an appropriate multitude, and is surrounded with a great number of gods and daemons, but partial souls rank among the last of their followers, for they are co-divided with daemons, and divine natures, and participate of the liberated principality of the gods, as far as they are able. For, as Socrates says, that which is willing and able always follows the gods. Through these things therefore, we have reminded the reader, that the 12 leaders of wholes celebrated by Socrates in the Phaedrus, belong to the liberated gods. Chapter XX. In the next place, let us show whence they derive the whole of this number. It is necessary therefore, that they should have their hypostasis from the gods prior to them, since the progression to the assimilative gods was from the intellectual fathers, and to the intellectual fathers supernally from the intelligible and at the same time intellectual gods, just as to these the progression was from the first intelligibles. For since the order of the assimilative rulers is prior to that of the liberated gods, as is also the triad of the intellectual kings, or rather the demiurgic monad establishing in itself the all-perfect measure of the division of wholes into the triad, this being the case we must survey the causes of the generation of the liberated gods according to both these, viz. According to the demiurgic measure, and the genera of the assimilative gods, for the different orders of them are imparted from these two. Moreover, if we remember what has been before observed, we gave a fourfold division to the middle progressions of the assimilative gods, and we said that some of them are paternal, others prolific, others of an elevating, and others of a guardian nature. Since therefore, the demiurgic monad divides progressions into firsts, middle, and last, in the same manner as the intelligible father prior to it, but the gods posterior to this monad, emit the rivers of themselves tetradicular to secondary natures. This being the case, the dodecad of liberated gods presents itself to our view, above indeed proceeding according to the triad, but beneath being quadruply multiplied. Hence, of the genera which give completion to it, some indeed are allotted the demiurgic and paternal triadically, others, the generative and vivific triadically, others, the elevating peculiarity triadically, and others after the same manner the undefiled and guardian characteristic, for all their peculiarities are derived from the multitude of the assimilative gods, but the division of them into firsts, middle and lasts, proceeds from the demiurgic cause, and thus much concerning the number of the liberated gods, whence, and how it is generated. Chapters c. Since therefore, as we have before observed, there are 12 leaders of all the mundane gods, of all daemons, and farther still, of such partial souls as are able to be extended to the intelligible, again in this dodecad, the mighty Jupiter and Vesta are allotted the more ruling order, but the principality of the rest is co-arranged with these, and has a secondary dignity, and Jupiter indeed, being neither the intellect of the universe, as some say he is, nor the intellect in the sun, nor in short, any one of mundane intellects or souls, but being expanded above all these, and pre-existing among the liberated gods, elevates the choir of gods, and of the genera superior to us that follow him, and imparts paternal goodness to the multitude converted to him. But he is the leader of all the other numbers that terminate under the 12 gods. Again however, Vesta indeed governs an appropriate multitude, but she neither has the order of the first soul, nor is that which is called the earth in the universe, but prior to these, she is allotted a ruling power among the super-celestial gods. She imparts however, her own peculiarity to the numbers of the other leaders, in the same manner as Jupiter, for the leaders that are suspended from the decad, participate also of these two monads. Jupiter however, being indeed the cause of motion is the leader to all things of a progression to the intelligible, but Vesta illuminates all things with stable and inflexible power, though Jupiter also abiding in himself, is thus elevated to the intelligible place of survey, and Vesta on account of an inflexible and undefiled permanency in herself, is conjoined to the first causes. The emission however of a different peculiarity, affords the difference of dominion, for since there are twofold conversions in the gods, for all things are converted to themselves and to their principles, each form of conversion indeed, was impartibly in King Saturn, for according to Parmenides he is demonstrated to be in himself, and in another, and the latter indeed, pertains to a conversion to a more excellent nature, but the former implies a conversion to himself. In the secondary however, and more partial gods, both these forms shine forth in a divided manner, and Vesta indeed, imparts to the mundane gods an undefiled establishment in themselves, but Jupiter imparts to them an elevating motion to first natures, for Vesta belongs to the undefiled, but Jupiter to the paternal series, but they are divided by a subsistence in self, and a subsistence in another, as we have before observed. It must be said therefore, that everything stable and immutable, and which possesses an invariable sameness of subsistence, arrives to all mundane natures from the super-celestial Vesta, and that on this account all the poles are immovable, and the axes about which the circulations of the spheres convolve themselves. It must also be said, that the wholenesses of the circulations are firmly established, that the earth abides immovably in the middle, and that the centers have an unshaken permanency, from the super-celestial Vesta. Again therefore, it must be admitted that all motions, separate energies, and the conversions of secondary to first natures, are derived to wholes from Jupiter, for the intellectual orders are not only united to coordinate intelligibles, but also to such as are exempt, on account of the elevating progression of Jupiter, and divine souls following the mighty Jupiter are extended as far as to the first causes. The attendants of these also are collected together with the gods, in consequence of being suspended from the paternal government of Jupiter. But again, with respect to all the remaining leaders, each presides over his proper series and imparts from himself his peculiarity to the whole multitude, suspended from him, and one of them indeed, imparts as far as to the last of things an unfolding, another, a prolific, and another, an immutable peculiarity, being themselves allotted a super-celestial order, and drawing upward a numerous army of partible gods. Hence Socrates also at one and the same time denominates them rulers, says that they have an arrangement, and that their energy is directed to secondary natures, ac according to the order in which they are placed. Each, however, of the other ruling gods who are ranked in the number of the 12, is a leader according to the order in which he is arranged. The ruling and leading peculiarity, therefore, alone, pertains to the supermundane gods, but to be arranged, and that which is arranged itself by itself, pertain to the mundane gods, for these are they who participate of order, and who are allotted order according to participation. Both these peculiarities, however, pertain to the liberator gods, for they are rulers and leaders, as being in continuity with the ruling, supermundane, gods, and they are arranged and participate of order, as being proximate to the mundane gods, but being the middle of both, they connect the whole progressions of them according to one intellectual bond. Farther still, as presiding indeed over the ruling order in the heavens, they come into contact with the mundane gods, and as being in themselves, and extended to the intelligible, they are allotted a transcendency separate from the universe, and exempt from their participants. Thus much, therefore, may suffice concerning the first division of these gods, since, however, we have before observed that their progression is tetradic and triadic, we shall concisely define the peculiarities of the arranged triads. Chapters Xi. These, therefore, being arranged according to triads, as we have said, of the demiurgic triad, indeed, Jupiter is allotted the highest order, supernally from intellect governing souls and bodies, and as Socrates says, taking care of all things, but Neptune here also gives completion to the middle of the demiurgic triad, and especially governs the psychical order, for this god is the cause of motion, and of all generation, but soul is the first of generated natures, and is essentially motion, and Vulcan inspires the nature of bodies, and fabricates all the mundane seats of the gods. Again, of the guardian and immutable triad, the first indeed is Vesta, because she preserves the very being of things, and an undefiled essence, for Socrates in the Cratylus gives to her the highest order, as connectedly containing the summits of wholes, but Minerva preserves middle lives inflexible, through intellection, and a self-energizing life, sustaining them from the incursions of matter, and Mars illuminates corporeal-formed natures with power, and an infrangible strength, as Socrates says in the Cratylus. Hence he is perfected by Minerva, and participates of a more intellectual inspiration, as the poetry of Orpheus says, and of a life separate from generated natures. Moreover, of the vivific triad, Ceres is the chief, entirely generating all mundane life, viz. The intellectual, the psychical, and that which is inseparable from body. But Juno contains the middle of the triad, and imparts the generation of soul, for the intellectual goddess emits from herself all the progressions of the other psychical genera, and Diana is allotted the end of the triad, moving all natural reasons into energy, and perfecting the imperfection of matter. Hence theologists, and Socrates in the Theototus, call her Lochia, or the power that presides over births, as being the inspective guardian of psychical progression and generation. Of the remaining triad, therefore, the anagogic, or elevating, Hermes indeed is the supplier of philosophy, and through this elevates souls, and by the dialectic powers, sends upward both total and partial souls to the good itself. But Venus is the first effective cause of the amatory inspiration which pervades through wholes, and familiarizes to the beautiful the lives that are elevated by her, and Apollo perfects and converts all things through music, convolving, as Socrates says, in the Cratylus, and through harmony and rhythm attracting to intellectual truth, and the light which is there. We say, however, in common respecting all of them, that establishing themselves above the mundane gods, they contain all the choir of the liberated gods, and souls indeed are suspended from them, but intellectual souls, and such as are as it were powers generative of souls. Hence Socrates also gives to them chariots, for Jupiter is said to drive a winged chariot, and the other gods after the same manner as Jupiter use secondary vehicles. But what else can we say these are than supermundane souls, on which they ride, and which are intellectual indeed, but the sources of partability and division, from which mundane souls are allotted their hypostasis, a more abundant separation, and a greater number of parts appearing in them, in consequence of their being adapted to be bound through analogy. In the liberated gods, therefore, the psychical peculiarity unites itself to intellect. Hence also, Jupiter is said to drive a winged chariot, without division, in consequence of this chariot being intellectual, and not departing from an immaterial and divine intellect. But in the mundane gods, divisions of horses and charioteers are delivered, for Socrates says in the Phaedrus, all the horses, therefore, and chariots of the gods are good, and consist of such things as are good. Hence an energy according to time first shines forth in the mundane gods, where there is a more abundant separation of powers, but in the liberated gods, time is always with eternity, and partability with union, for they are the principles of souls, and the causes of mundane natures, and are as it were intellectual seeds abiding in the intellectual comprehensions of themselves, and thus much concerning those things,